let's talk about a monster who has a bizarrely and perversely, I will admit, special place in my own affections or heart. The character that comes up on Halloween through a series of franchised films by that title. So when I think of the Halloween franchise, one of the people who perverted it or hijacked it was John Carpenter, who was responsible, of course, for making it great in the sense of the soundtrack. So with John Carpenter and the Halloween soundtrack, we have identified John Carpenter over the years because the man who created the Halloween franchise is dead and cannot protest it. Basically, John Carpenter has exploited that opportunity, has moved in, and people generally identify him as the creator of Halloween. Okay, this is not the case. So to give you a little backstory here of why Halloween has a special place in my heart, why it has actually some meaning, what we've got in the case of Michael Myers, his creator, is not at all John Carpenter. It is a Muslim individual named Mustafa Akkad. And Mustafa Akkad is almost totally unknown to the white American world today. He is someone who is a creator of a franchise that created the entire Mad Slasher phenomenon that has led to everyone else that now becomes included in a kind of category with Michael Myers, whether it's Freddy Krueger, whether it's a person like Jason from the Friday the 13th franchise, which is centered on Crystal Lake, which is an actual geographic location in California. The only person to actually predate Michael Myers is the historical Leatherface and the cinematic Leatherface, on which is based off the historical Leatherface, Ed Gein, which of course is the inspiration as a historical psychotic for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. And in terms of the Leatherface phenomena, that's a different thing I don't need to go into. But with Michael Myers, the creator Mustafa Akkad was a Muslim who had issues with his faith and with practitioners of his faith in the same way that I myself, as a true Christian, have, of course, issues with the perversion of Christianity by despoilers such as the white evangelical movement. And so when I confront that, I do so in the same spirit as Mustafa Akkad did when he tried to make the world aware of the negative aspects of Islam as perverted by fundamentalists, the fanatics who are stepping on the mic in terms of bicameral mindedness, doing all the talking, and essentially going forth to satisfy their own lustful urges for violence or vengeance and anything else they care to rationalize in the name of the Quran and Allah, the God. And Mustafa Akkad wrote a long screenplay on an honor murder, an honor killing, in which a brother murders his sister because he merely suspects that she's despoiled herself, besmirched herself in the name of the family by having sex with someone out of wedlock. And this is a screenplay that could never sell in the Muslim world. So Mustafa Akkad wound up changing and mutating the screenplay to sell it in the United States. And bigger than shit, he wound up selling it, much to his surprise, as a murder thriller. And the child, of course, is not going to be some Muslim practitioner of Southwest Asian or any other ethnicity to sell it in America, the big market. He had to, of course, rewrite the child as white. So if you see the original Halloween as screenplay written by Mustafa Akkad, who was also the producer, he was the producer of Halloween, he basically portrays Michael Myers as this young white boy who obviously has intense incestuous desire for his sister or some other issue, and winds up becoming inflamed with outrage when he sees her enter a room or an adjacent, the garage, the boathouse, whatever it is. She enters some other room that's not directly adjacent to the home. It's not directly connected with a boy, a friend, possibly a boyfriend, maybe just a boy who's a friend. And there is no time for them to be engaging in sexual relations. Whatever they're doing or whatever motivated them to enter this other building on the Myers property, in the film itself, if we're to follow it in real time, if we're to interpret that there be no artificial cinematic time lapse, and there's no reason for us to believe there be any, there is absolutely no time for his sister and this young lad to be engaging in anything before Michael Myers grabs a knife, puts on a William Shatner mask turned inside out, and basically makes a beeline towards that building on the Myers property, that other adjacent structure, to kill them, to kill his sister and the other boy. So this is an honor murder in the most classic, irrational, psychotic sense. He feels somehow his family's been besmirched. We can project those motivations onto him. Of course, he doesn't speak, so we don't get that from the character directly. But knowing the writer, Mustafa Akkad, and his original script, his original screenplay, we can simply take from what he intended and Americanize it. And basically what we have is an American Muslim in the most negative sense, taking like the aspects of perversion of Islam, of a just as we see the toxic Christians pervert Christianity so there be no charity left, and they sever families and sunder lives. So too, we see this manifest in Michael Myers. And the film became, thanks to everything involved, all the parts together, Mustafa Akkad's screenplay, and the uniqueness of the concept to the American mind at the time, or rather its appeal to a fundamentalist streak of toxic Christianity, of toxic puritanical Christianity in America that so mirrors everything negative they see in Islam, that they're totally unaware of, and all Americans who watched it had absolutely no conscious connection of the screenplay with what they were seeing on the screen. The Americans went for it and just ate that shit up and demanded more. And after that, every other mad slasher flick came based on the serial honor killer of Michael Matthews as a phenomena. Michael Myers. But Michael Myers, the screen character, he became the prototype, the template for everybody else after. And you've got kind of a separate from him whatever happened with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which I didn't have the equal amount of interest in because there wasn't this international phenomena behind it that created that franchise. But in terms of Michael Myers, he started it all because with Leatherface, he was just too brutal. It was just too backwoods. It was just not something that people could identify with in that transition zone between the city and the countryside that the suburbs provided for Michael Myers. So when Michael Myers went and did what he did, and he found out he liked what he did just so much he just couldn't stop, then you had the guy who started it all. And so Michael Myers is, because he doesn't talk, he of course gets perverted by other writers who took over the franchise because Mustafa Akkad wasn't alive to continue dedicating his energies to the franchise. He did become involved, I believe, with no choice of his own, with Halloween #2. And after that, he was no longer alive to participate in any of them. The money he had amassed from the Halloween success, the original release, he tried to use to help Americans understand Islam and Arabic culture from a more positive and just relatable perspective. He directed a film entitled The Wind and the Lion, or produced it, like he had produced Halloween. And with The Wind and the Lion, he went all out and he hired megastars like Sean Connery to portray an Arab Bedouin Tuareg tribal warrior resisting European colonialism and American imperialism. And that movie, of course, crashed and burned. So no one went to see The Wind and the Lion, which would have been the film that Mustafa Akkad wanted to be known for. Everybody went to see Michael Myers go on an honor-killing spree again and again, as rewrit multiple times. The last thing on earth Mustafa Akkad would want to have been identified with. And the end result was you had this birth of a franchise, which then a pseudo-criminal named John Carpenter took advantage of the death of Mustafa Akkad to basically hijack and claim as his own. There's no denying he produced the music, which is part of what makes Michael Myers. That's part of the signature, the brand, the logo. That's part of the magic. But he did not write that screenplay. He did not do everything to make that film possible that Mustafa Akkad did. Now, to compound the tragedy, the travesty and the irony of the life of Mustafa Akkad, you've got this Lebanese individual who winds up dying along with his daughter at the daughter's wedding because of a married pair of suicide bombers, if you can believe this. A group of fanatical Muslims, the kind who experience that horrible perversion of bicamerality where they're doing all the talking and cannot ever hear Allah speak. They decided that Mustafa Akkad had done Islam a great disservice by providing the West an example of what honor killing was all about, having no comprehension that in the West, the Americans were so fucking ignorant. They had no idea that's what Halloween was all about. and appreciated the film from a totally different perspective that was non-theological. This network of lunatics also felt that his attempts to cater to the West by popularizing Islam in the most peaceful sense via films like The Wind and the Lion, that this wasn't doing Islam justice, that it should be spread at the tip of a scimitar. They assigned a married couple, a man and a wife with suicide bomb vests, to invade the wedding of the daughter of Mustafa Akkad, at which he was attendant and physically present. The woman pulled her string first, the cord. Her vest did not explode. It was a dud. The man pushed her to the ground, and one wonders what went through that man's mind at that time. Is this an act of chivalry to push her aside, take her place with a suicide bomb? Is an act of contempt? How can you even fathom the reasoning of a couple such as that when you're dealing with this level of madness? He pulled the cord and his suicide vest worked. His bomb exploded and it took out pretty much everybody at the wedding. Mustafa Akkad and his daughter. So the Arab Muslim the Levantine, the Lebanese man, who wrote of an honor killing that became the basis for all mad slasher films from that point forward, the template, the inspiration, died in a terrorist suicide bombing that took he and his daughter out at his daughter's wedding, based on the fact that many Muslims felt he had insulted Islam by somehow exposing the worst, seediest, darkest underbelly of their culture through a franchise that no American even ever consciously or unconsciously or in any way, shape, or form connected to Islam. And the popular film that he had made to try and have Americans understand Arabic culture in the sense of the honorable warrior of independence flopped completely in cinemas. His life is it's exemplary of tragedy. And so I have a special place in my heart for his creation. And his creation, the young man with the inside-out mask of William Shatner, of Captain Kirk. Here you have him in his one-piece overalls, his laborer's uniform, kind of like the example of the working man, the blue-collar man, going around on a killing spree that's essentially never stopped. And so when they rebooted the Michael Myers franchise, 4 decades after he first terrorized audiences, he proved that he still had the goods as a fictitious character. And so the latest installment in the franchise, which was a massive success with both critics and at the box office, earning nearly 80 million United States dollars its opening weekend and earning an 80% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, it was celebrated as a return to form for the Halloween series, taking the focus off of confusing family trees and ancient witchcraft, and instead Halloween brought the focus back to what audiences crave, which is Michael Myers' insatiable, borderline inhuman lust for ending human life. Now, with plenty of other on-screen killers racking up high body counts, I still don't think there's anybody who does it with the sincere intensity of Michael Myers. He doesn't crack jokes. He isn't teaching some grand life lesson. And here I'm alluding to both Freddy Krueger and, of course, the character from that horrible series of that franchise known as Saw. And he also doesn't have some tragic backstory that explains why he's the way he is, as with Jason of Friday the 13th. He seems to have been born pure evil and finds pleasure only in the destruction of others, ideally in a way that's equally terrifying and savage. And so there is a whole lot of murder in his latest incarnation. But it wasn't just your standard slasher killing spree, because Halloween was intent on reminding viewers of the brutality that separates Myers from his peers. So there's one scene in which Myers lets a future victim know of his malicious intent by dropping the teeth of a previous victim on the floor of the bathroom stall she's sitting in. There's another where he snaps the neck of a preteen boy shortly, who we had spent just enough time with to humanize, making his death a very chilling reminder that there's no line Myers won't cross once he's begun on a murderous rampage, except for one. Because while Michael Myers is unquestionably a monster in his latest incarnation, the film which came out last year, there's one brief moment that undermines the entirely evil characterization that he earns himself. And that moment occurs after Myers has returned to the suburbs of Haddonfield, Illinois, and is quickly racking up a body count that puts his previous efforts to shame. And at one point, Myers ends up in a random house and immediately disposes of the woman who lives there. But the woman isn't the only person in the house. And as Myers is slaughtering his latest victim, the faint cry of a baby can be heard in the background. And this immediately has its intended effect and puts the audience on edge as we follow Myers around the house. We can hear him getting closer to the infant. And perhaps the tensest moment of the entire film, Myers finally reaches the crib, and of course the unthinkable thought enters all our minds that Michael Myers is going to slaughter an infant. And after pausing for a split second, Myers leaves the baby unharmed, other than the obvious damage of having murdered the child's mother, and heads back out to slice and dice a few more unsuspecting suburbanites on his way to exact revenge against Laurie Strode. Now, this literally momentary interaction between Michael Myers and the crying baby has no bearing whatsoever on the actual plot, and yet it is probably Halloween as a franchise, probably its most revealing glimpse into the mind of this vicious serial killer, while the rest of the movie works tirelessly to convince us that Myers is an unrepentant monster. His decision not to kill a defenseless, crying baby shows that he may actually have a shred of humanity left within him. That even Myers, who is meant to represent evil personified, knows that killing a baby is simply too dark and decides to stick to murdering adults instead. Now, realistically, of course, having Myers stab the infant, even off screen, would have been too dark for many viewers. In fact, when asked about Myers' decision not to commit infanticide, the latest Halloween co-writer and director, David Gordon Green, has stated flat out, quite openly, it's the one ethical choice Myers makes. But why have him make that choice at all? The existence of the baby did nothing for the plot, and arguably, among the hardcore addicts, the gore fans, undermines the entire character of Michael Myers. Or perhaps Halloween is suggesting that while Myers may be the most deranged and vile villain in cinematic history, he still has potential for redemption. That perhaps even the evilest among us can have an intrinsic understanding of right and wrong that makes them recognize that killing a defenseless baby is simply too far. Now, none of this excuses the multiple homicides committed by Myers throughout the film, but it is the one moment that suggests he is not, in fact, pure evil, who will kill literally anyone who crosses him. When you're witnessing Myers devastate an entire town with his methodical approach to murder, it forces one to take a moment to appreciate the fact that even one of the most iconic movie murderers knows that baby murder is a line you simply don't cross. So when Halloween director David Gordon Green tried to add some details to this choice in the field, he was interviewed, at least in the interview I was able to see, with Collider, a representative of that circular. I think it's an e-zine like everything else these days. He first joked that Michael doesn't kill the infant because that would be so rude, before stating, I think it was a consideration when Michael pauses. And then he discussed the origin of the moment, which was a last-minute scramble when an actor didn't turn up. So that's terrifying in its own right if you have any involvement with the industry. You get a last-minute idea. I mean, why is there a baby crib in the living room? It was going to be her husband sleeping on the couch, but then hubby didn't show up, and they scrambled, and they put a baby crib in there. And then they just thought it would be interesting to see one ethical choice made in the film, and they flew with it. So Michael pausing by the crib makes for one of the most chilling moments in that cinematic franchise history, precisely because of what could happen. But while Michael Myers might be a monster, it would have been no longer horror, but just plain revulsion to depict him as a baby killer, too. So since he's referred to as well as simply the Shape, he's called that not because he's shapeless, because we obviously have the mask, we obviously have the character, we have the outline, the physical form. He's called the Shape because his motives are entirely unknown. And while the director admitted that he had Michael Myers pause to intimate, to suggest that he likely considered the option, the fact that he made the ethical choice adds another layer of mystery to his actions that makes him far more frightening than if he were simply some mad beast. So, of course, it's also important to remember that the latest reboot dismisses everything other than the original from the entire franchise. So, if you feel I'm psychoanalyzing The Shape too much, because The Curse of Michael Myers featured him chasing after his infant nephew, then remember, that doesn't exist in the timeline of the reboot. So the way that I see Michael Myers, the way that I feel Michael Myers, is that developmentally speaking, Michael Myers is still a 6-year-old child. And the way I perceive Michael Myers is that night when he stabbed his sister to death, he ceased developing emotionally. And for this reason, I perceive Michael Myers to see children as his peers. The fact that he only murders on Halloween, a holiday most celebrated by children, is manifest of his deranged sense of playfulness. He has a mysterious hatred towards teenagers, especially women who remind him of his sister. So an old school psychiatrist would, of course, argue he had a sexual attraction to his own sister, and her perceived promiscuity made him angry. So that doesn't, of course, in any way, shape, or form, contrast with my more personal interpretation.